This module is everything I think you need to know about disruptive innovation theory. So I'm going to be referring to particularly to the Clayton Christensen Innovator's Dilemma book quite a bit. And that is the book that really defines disruptive innovation, gives lots of examples and things, but I'm going to try and boil that down in the next 30 minutes or so to everything that you really need to know. Um, the roots of this actually come from a different place. This is Andy Grove, who was a CEO of Intel and wrote a great book called Only the Paranoid Survive, which maybe should also be on your reading list. And he talked about inflection points, and what he said basically, and what you're seeing here, is that businesses naturally hit these points where they make decisions every day, and occasionally a decision will come up that you have to make, and if you do it right, your business will grow rapidly, and if you make the decision poorly, your business will decline, possibly to the demise of the entire business. And that's sort of like the general idea. And you might say, well, don't all decisions do that? Well, in a fairly minor kind of way, maybe. But he's talking about the really big examples where that basically threaten the existence of your company, is really what he's referring to. And more what he says about inflection points, there's some interesting quotes here where he says, business success contains the seeds of its own destruction. The more successful you are, the more people want a chunk of your business. Makes sense. If you're making money, other people are looking over the fence at you going, well, how do I get a piece of that? Particularly if you've found a way to make money that they didn't know about. They're going to want to copy it. They're going to want to steal your market share. Just normal way this happens in business. He says, I believe that the primary responsibility of a manager is to guard constantly against other people's attacks. Also makes sense. Now, here's the interesting thing is that if you run a business, you must recognize that no amount of formal planning can anticipate these changes. Now, that's a profound statement. What he's saying is that you can go to business school, you can learn about strategic planning, which we'll learn something about a little later, and all these different things. And there's really no amount of formal planning that can actually anticipate this, can tell you that now you're ready and you're not going to get surprised and everything's going to go great for you. It's just not possible. That's really what he's saying. Now, Clayton Christensen jumps in behind and talks about some different things. He says that the decisions that have led to failure in some of these companies that he uses as an example were made when the leaders in question were widely regarded as among the best companies in the world. And that's a really interesting and profound statement in and of itself. And he has some examples. I remember Sears being one of them, where at the exact same time that Forbes was writing articles about how well they were doing back in the 90s, basically the decisions had already been made that were going to end up losing their business to Amazon and other online vendors. They just weren't going to be ready for the disruption that the internet was to retail. And then he says, precisely because these firms listened to their customers, invested aggressively in new technologies that would provide their customers with more or better products of the sort that they wanted and were asking for, and because they carefully studied market trends and systematically allocated investment capital to innovations that promised the best returns, they lost their position of leadership. Pay attention to what he just said there. What he basically said is, you got your MBA and you learned how to do all these things. You went into the workplace and you did them. You did exactly what you were supposed to do, and that's actually the reason that you lost your position of leadership. Okay, so now we're going to need him to explain what he really means by that.
Hello, I'm Des Dearlove. Welcome to The Idea. My guest today is Professor Clayton Christensen. Clay, welcome.
Oh, thanks, Des.
What exactly is disruptive innovation? Explain it.
A disruptive innovation is not a breakthrough innovation that makes good products a lot better. But it has a very specific definition, and that is it transforms a product that historically was so expensive and complicated that only a few people with a lot of money and a lot of skill had access to it. A disruptive innovation makes it so much more affordable and accessible that a much larger population have access to it.
So give us an example of this. I mean, most people are familiar with the computer industry and how that's developed. Perhaps you can use that as an example.
Yeah, so at the beginning, the first manifestation of digital technology was a mainframe computer. It cost several $1 million to buy, and it took years to be trained to operate these things. And so that meant that the largest corporations and the largest universities could have one, you know. And so we had to take our problem to the center where the experts solved it for us. But then there's a sequence of innovations from the mainframe to a mini, to a desktop, to a laptop, and now to a smartphone that has democratized technology to the point that everybody has access to it around the world. And we are much better off. It was very hard, though, for the pioneers of the industry to catch these new waves. Most of those were created and dominated by new companies.
And then you're touching on that gives rise to, this process gives rise to the innovator's dilemma, which was the title of your 1997 book.
Yeah, that's right.
But how do people get around that? I mean, that dilemma, can you explain the dilemma itself to us?
Yeah, so the dilemma is in every company, every day, every year, people are going into senior management, knocking on the door saying, I got a new product for us. And some of those entail making better products that you could sell for higher prices to your best customers. A disruptive innovation generally has to cause you to go after new markets, people who aren't your customers. And the product that you want to sell them is something that is just so much more affordable and simple that your current customers can't buy it, you know? And so the choice that you have to make is, should we make better products that we could sell for better profits to our best customers? Or maybe we ought to make worse products that none of our customers would buy that would ruin our margins. What should we do? And that really is the dilemma. It was the dilemma that General Motors and Ford faced when they tried to decide, should we go down and compete against Toyota, who came in at the bottom? Or should we make even bigger SUVs for even bigger people? And now Toyota has the same problem. As the Koreans in Hyundai and Kia have really won the low end of the market from Toyota. And it's not because Toyota's asleep at the switch, but why would they ever invest to defend the lowest profit part of their market, which is the subcompacts, when they have the privilege of competing against Mercedes? You know, and then Chery is coming from China, doing the same thing to the Koreans.
So one of the things I really like about your ideas is that they really do have had an impact out there. I mean, some of this thinking has, without question, influenced a whole generation of managers, including people like Steve Jobs. You're referenced in the biography that he read the book and was very influenced by the book, and possibly Apple I and Apple II are, you know, him resolving the innovator's dilemma.
Yeah.
But also Andy Grove at Intel. You had a contact with him.
Yeah. It's I never imagined that I could ever meet these people, you know, let alone be judged as having helped them. But I learned a lot from Andy Grove. So what happened was I was just at HBS minding my own business, and Andy Grove called me just out of the blue and said, look, I'm a busy man. I don't have time to read drivel from academics, you know, but somebody told me you had this theory, and I wondered if you could come out and present what you're learning to me and my staff, and then tell us how it applies to Intel. And for me, it was a chance of a lifetime. So I flew out there, and it turned out he's quite a gruff man. And he said, you know, stuff's happened to us. We only have 10 minutes for you. So just tell us what it means for Intel. And I said, Andy, I can't because I have no opinion about Intel, but the theory has an opinion. And so I have to describe the theory. So he sat back impatiently, and 10 minutes into it, he chucked me off and he said, look, I got your stupid theory. Tell us what it means for Intel. And he got what he got, and he really did get it, you know. And I said, Andy, I need 5 more minutes because I got to describe how this process of disruption worked its way through a totally different industry, just so you can visualize what can happen to Intel. So I described how the mini mills came in to the steel market at rebar and then went up market. And when I was done with that, Grove said, "Oh, I get it. So what you're telling me it means for Intel is," and he described how they had two companies coming at them from below, and Intel needs to go down and not let them go up against us. It was very successful.
And that was the Celeron processor.
Yeah, that's right. And I've thought about this. If I'd have been suckered into telling Andy Grove what he should do, I'd have been killed, because he knew so much more about microprocessors than I ever would know. But rather than telling him what to think, I taught him how to think. And he could reach his own conclusions. And that changed the way I teach. It changed the way I talk. And the insight is that, for whatever reason, the way they designed the world, data is only available about the past. And when we teach people that they should be data-driven and fact-based and analytical as they look into the future, in many ways we condemn them to take action when the game is over. So the only way you can look into the future, there's no data, so you have to have a good theory. And we don't think about it, but every time we're taking an action, it's predicated upon a theory. And so by teaching managers to look through the lens of a theory into the future, you can actually see the future very clearly.
Now,
and I think that's what the theory of disruption has done.
Clay Christensen, thank you very much for talking to us.
Oh, thanks for taking the time to ask such great questions.
So now, what can we really say about disruptive technology and innovation after hearing what Professor Christensen had to say? First of all, not all change is disruptive. It's a really important point to make. When I talk about disruptive technology, everybody wants everything to be disruptive then, because they sort of see disruptive as an attractive thing. It's great to be disruptive. It definitely has its upside, but it also has its downside. But the truth is that disruption is actually rare. Most change that you find makes things better. This is what engineers do every day. They look at their products and they think of ways that they can make them cheaper, faster, lighter, whatever better actually is. They want to improve them. But it's along the same improvement trajectory. So these are sustaining technologies. Please understand, almost every technology that you can think of is going to be on a sustaining technology trajectory, not a disruptive one. Disruption is rare and it's hard to find. Real innovation, though, is going to happen as a result of disruption. And here's what we mean by this, is that, first of all, it's really hard to identify, especially in the situation that you're in. And it's even harder to react to effectively, to kind of figure out what it is that you really ought to do about it. The benefit is that what it actually disrupts is the marketplace, and the marketplace will restructure itself as a result of that disruption. So let's look at an example here, an analogy. Now, what I want you to imagine is that this little terrain you're looking at here represents all possible designs of consumer-grade video players. And what this means is that designs that are on the hilltops are the really good ones, and the designs that are down in the valleys are the really bad ones, the ones that won't sell, they're very poor quality or what have you, right? So it's just a matter of an infinite set of ways of producing consumer-grade video for consumers. In a variety of different ways, but they're not all the same. Some are better than others, right? So now let's just randomly pick a point and say that's what that when the DVD was invented, there's the point on the surface where the DVD goes. Now, if I want to look at Blu-ray, for example, what I can do is I can merely climb the hill from DVD to Blu-ray. They both come on a disc. They both come on a disc that's even the same size, so the same player can play both of them. But Blu-ray is clearly superior to DVD. The amount of data storage that you have on it is way better. It has advanced features in the video. There's all kinds of things you can do with Blu-ray that you can't do with DVD. So it's clearly better, right? So you climb the hill to get to Blu-ray. Okay? But here's my question. Where is video on demand? So where's Netflix, Amazon Prime, Hulu, all the streaming services that you probably have at home now? Where are those? They're not DVDs and they're not Blu-ray. Well, when they first got started, let's talk about Netflix being one of the very first entrants. Where was that? Well, we'll just sort of randomly pick a point, right? And I don't know where that actually is on this terrain, right? Could be there, right? But here's the point is that it's at a lower, it's down in a valley. It's below DVD. If you remember Netflix when it first came out, a lot of us were scratching our heads saying, who's going to buy this? It's not any good. People were still on modems. It would hiccup all the time. The resolution was really bad. Nobody wanted it. But it actually had something that other things didn't have, right? So, first of all, it's not on the same trajectory as a DVD. It's a completely different technology that actually solves the same problem. I can sit at home and watch a movie. Great. But the key is that wherever Netflix started, it was at a lower point than the DVD was. It actually was a worse product than the DVD. So you can imagine if you're in the industry of producing DVDs and Blu-ray, right? You're looking at Netflix, patting them on the head and saying, that's cute. You just go ahead and do that. We're going to do what we're doing because you don't take them very seriously. Nobody's laughing anymore. In fact, Netflix some years ago has already stopped. They used to ship DVDs was a big part of their business. It isn't anymore because the quality of their streaming service is so much better than it was, and it's very high. You can get 4K. You can do everything now. All right? So here's what you need to know about disruptive technologies. Here's a definition. I promised you a definition. Here it is. Disruptive technologies, they tend to apply most to an underserved or a niche market, at least initially. So you're usually looking for a market that is not being satisfied in some way. They're unhappy with what the current products are for some reason. They're also going to be of lesser quality than the mainstream technology, but here's a key, but they appeal to users on a different set of performance characteristics than the mainstream competition. So in our example with Netflix and DVDs, what was the different performance characteristic? It was on demand. I didn't have to go to the store and buy a DVD. I didn't have to go and take it out of the library or request it to be shipped to my house from Netflix. I just went online, clicked on it. A few seconds later, I'm watching a movie. So that was a performance characteristic that they were striving for. You only get it that way. You can't get it the other way, right? And here's the thing, it's never asked for by the customer. So if you looked at some movie buff that's got shelves full of DVDs at home back in the day, hey, what would you like? He'd say, give me more movies, give me higher resolution, give me whatever. He's stuck in the model of discs, right? Okay, so now one of the best examples that Christensen gives is about disk drives. A little bit older technology, but it's a really great one for explaining disruption. So capacity was the only performance metric anybody cared about back in the day. But that is size, that is megabytes, was really all that mattered. And then along came the portable market, and it disrupted it. Right? So there's lots of other examples, right? So think about what the personal computer did when it replaced typewriters, the smartphone disrupting the camera and music player market, musical downloads replacing physical CDs, which pretty much went away. Think about Uber disrupting the taxi industry. Think about low-cost, fuel-efficient cars like the Toyota Corolla entering the established car market. Who was thinking about a really, really cheap car back at that time, and the manufacturing that would take to drive the cost way down. I like to show this because it's kind of funny. This is the log file from the first internet transmission. It was called ARPANET at the time. The date is October 29th, 1969, and it's UCLA communicating with SRI. So the two original nodes on the internet, and they logged on. They're trying to log on, and they got through the L and the O before it crashed. Now, who would have predicted that something so useless would end up impacting every facet of your lives? Because this was the internet. That this was the very, very dawn of the internet, was connecting computers at a long distance through a network protocol. And what industry has not been impacted by the internet now? But that's how bad it was at the very beginning. You had to have real vision to believe in it. Okay, here is the snapshot that you need to know to be able to understand. If you can reproduce this, you understand disruptive technology theory. So let's walk through it very, very quickly, and you kind of see how it works, right? So initially, you talk about the market leader. They're on a line. The red dotted line is going to be progress due to the sustaining technology. Remember, they're engineers on the market leader. Every year, listen to their customers and make their products a little better. So that's the sustaining technology trajectory for the market leader. Now the other one to the right is the green dotted line is the trajectory of the disruptive technology. Notice it's a little steeper, meaning it's getting better a little faster. But also notice that on the timeline from left to right, it's behind. It's lower than the red line. So that's why nobody on the red line is paying any attention to anybody at the green line, because they're like the DVD guys patting the Netflix guys on the head saying, that's cute, that's a cute little toy, but that's not real yet. That's not anything that we care about. So things to pay attention to. The lower dotted line there on the bottom is the performance demanded at the low end of the market. Below that line, you really don't have a market. You have hobbyists maybe who care, but that's about it. You don't really have a market at that point. You got to get past that before you can enter the real market. But below that line, there are hobbyists and people with vision who will buy into something, seeing its potential. That's the toehold that a disruptive technology needs. It uses that investment, remember it's small and agile, to improve very rapidly. Next thing you know, it's above that lower dotted line, and the next thing you know, you are a serious player and you are eating into the market share of the market leader. And the last point I want to make here is the performance demanded at the high end of the market. All that's pointing out is that in certain market segments, there's a point at which you're making your product better, but the market is sort of shrugging its shoulders and going, nice, but do I really care? Think about all the features that come out. The next time you rev Windows on your PC, the next time we rev Mac OS on our Macs, there's going to be a number of features there, right, that are improvements to the operating system. Do you really care about any of them? I mean, if they didn't give you those, would you really be sad? Would it really bother you? Mostly not. And occasionally one comes along that's like, wow, that's really great. I love it. I got to have it. But most of the time, not. So that, in other words, those sort of markets have hit a saturation. They've already hit the high end of the market. Now, what Christensen shows you here are a number of different technologies in the disk drive industry and how it has been disrupted repeatedly. So here you go all the way back to the beginning, and you had a 14-inch drive in the mainframe market. Everybody who was in that market, right? So the leaders of the 14-inch drive are these guys, right? Well, they didn't see the 8-inch drive from the mini computer market coming along. Here comes that one. There's a different set of leaders. The names all changed. These guys didn't see the 5 1/4 drive technology coming along. Here's these guys. Another different set of names come up. These guys don't see the 3.5-inch drive coming along. No, the names change again. These guys don't see 2.5-inch drives, and these guys don't see things like flash drives, cloud storage, all that kind of stuff. That's new today. We now don't have drives at all in most of our devices. Every single time this happens. So it's like certain industries can't even learn from the past. As soon as they get disrupted, they are the next in line to be disrupted. All right, so what happened to these companies? Let's think about it. Why were they unable to identify up-and-coming technology? Why weren't they able to switch when it was clear that the market was changing? All right, now we got to go back to our inflection points. Remember, this is our rough picture, right? We've got our performance at the high end, performance at the low end. Here's our sustaining technology on the blue line, and here's our progress due to sustaining technologies on the disruption. If you make your jump early, imagine you're an innovative guy, you're looking at in your organization, you're like, hey, there's this cool technology out there right now. It's not really ready for prime time, but I think we need to make a switch to it. If you make the jump early, what you risk is something like this. The bottom curve there is market share. You actually will hurt your business in the short term so that you can benefit in the long term. Notice that the immediate after effects after the inflection point at T0 is that your market share goes down. But then look at what happens later on. It goes up. This is why it's called the innovator's dilemma. In order to innovate, you have to hurt yourself in the short term in order to win in the long term. Now, the good news here is that disruptive technologies are hypersensitive to first movers. If you move early and you get in on the ground floor, right, in industry, this means you get to write the rules. Think about different standards get set by the first movers. They get to set the price. They gain all the fastest market share. Implications for us in DoD is that since we don't care about market share, that's not our thing, is we can drive the technology instead of being driven by it. We can have a seat at the table because it's now, even though it's now a proprietary technology, we can actually have ownership in it. Or at least get a cheap entry fee rather than paying big later. Because if you play the waiting game, as we'll see in a minute, you got to play the same cost everybody else has to pay, and it can be steep. Now, there's a venture capitalist firm called InQtel, it's a part of the CIA, that is famous for investing in a little company called Keyhole that you might have heard about. And Keyhole became Google Earth. You can imagine why the CIA might have had an interest in Google Earth. Well, that investment got the CIA a seat at the table, and you can bet to this day the CIA is using derivatives of Google Earth type products that are entirely proprietary to the CIA. You don't get that sort of stuff, but the technology they now have an ownership stake in because they were able to invest in it early. All right. The bad news for an early jump is that early adoption is typically below the minimal performance level, and so you can have growing pains on the early stages. So this really only apply to hobbyists and early adopters, and you kind of have to wait for the technology to improve. That can be a problem. And so you're also bailing out of a highly profitable market in favor of an unprofitable one. That's often very hard to sell to a board of directors or an advisory board or whatever we have to deal with in DoD. And even bigger than the market that you're in. So, and this is why, again, it's called the innovator's dilemma. So let's look at the alternative. What if you play the wait and see game, which we often do in Department of Defense? We say, okay, I see it. Let's just wait, and we'll make the jump when we're ready. Okay, here's what can happen then. I left the other line, the dark green line, for reference. Now what happens is you actually win in the short term because your market share keeps going up. The other guys are bailing out, and you're getting their market share. But by the time you get to T1, the die is cast. You have not bought into the new technology. Everybody's switching to the new technology in droves, and you no longer have a leadership position in your own market. Now, the good news in this example is that now it's at a state when you can use it, so it's a mainstream product, and it's readily available, so you're ready to go. The bad news is you're kind of too late. So you're kind of locked into whoever the first mover was. The rules have been set. Everybody, you got to play by somebody else's rules. You're going to have to license it from them. They're going to tell you how you can use it. If there's a standard that's being set, it's been set by somebody else, not you. And it all got set by somebody else. Implications for us in DoD is that the cost can be a lot higher, especially for like maintenance. And possibly you end up with another legacy system because you may be unable to architect your system the way you want to because you're tied into the old thing when the rest of the market has moved on to the new thing. So a couple of quick scenarios to make the point. Scenario A, the manager says who's going to buy it, and you've got a marketing person who talks about, hey, we know what the market wants. We've been asking them. We know how big the market is. We know what they really want to do. We've talked to engineering. We know how to build it. We know exactly what we're going to price it at. He's asked if engineers thinks they can do it. Yeah, it'll be a stretch, but they can do it. We can build it in our current factory. We can get close to 35%. Okay, great. Plausible conversation. You think something like that happens all the time. Here's scenario B. Who's going to buy it? Well, I'm not sure, but there's got to be a market out there someplace. People always want things that are smaller and less expensive. Have you run this idea past any of our potential customers? Well, yeah, but they don't really get it. They don't understand it. They need at least 275 megabytes to do anything useful. Do you think you can make any money on this? Well, I think so, but it depends on how we can price it and how the market responds. Now, given that those two examples, who do you think is most likely to get the green light, A or B? A, every single time. He's locked down. He's done his marketing homework. He knows exactly what he's doing. He's going to get the green light. He's going to get funded to do whatever it was he was asking to do. When in fact, that technology that B was talking about could be the very thing that puts A out of business. All right, so some typical criticisms of disruptive technology theory are: why should I care about disruptive technologies and inflection points if I can only identify them in hindsight? This is a really valid criticism. All the examples that we have are all looking in our rearview mirror, going, see that? You should have recognized that and made a better decision. Well, at the moment, they probably made what appeared to be a really good decision. So it's really hard to do. So we're going to come back to this in a moment of a way for us to deal with this in DoD. If I correctly identify a technology as disruptive, how do I even know what the right response is to address it? This is a little bit easier. We're going to come to this in a sec. And we're the government, so we shouldn't really even have a role in this. Let the market just figure it out, and we'll just buy it on the back end. Well, I think I already made the case for this. If you do this, then you are likely on the outside looking in, paying top dollar for access, because business isn't going to cut us a deal just because we're the government. That's just not the way it's going to work. So, some things to think about here. Some simple principles of disruption is, first of all, customers control the pattern of resource allocation. So resources are going to go to products that sell. That's just the way it works. Small markets don't solve the growth needs for big companies. They just don't. So big companies, they have to follow the big markets, which makes them highly susceptible to disruption. The use of disruptive technologies is unknowable in advance. So that's just a characteristic of them. And organizations have capabilities that are independent of the people who work for them. So technology supply may not actually equal market demand. So this is a part of what we're seeing in disruption, is looking at who needs something may not actually be the thing that tells you what it is you really ought to be doing. So what should you do about it? Number one, this is from a DoD perspective. Embed projects to develop commercialize disruptive technologies within organizations who have customers who might need them. So what we can do in DoD is we can find little niche organizations. So we're talking about healthcare, medical, M&S. You can find little niches of our customer base who aren't really being served very well by the mainstream products that we're using, and maybe could make use of something that could actually be disruptive in nature. Target those guys. The dollars will be smaller. They'll be happy because they're getting something, and you're not missing out. 2, put these projects in organizations that are small enough to care about them. So it could be a small shop or a small schoolhouse someplace that actually has a need that nobody else has, but they'll care about them, they'll champion them, and we can get a win that way. You want to plan to fail early and inexpensively. That means that in DoD, we want to be able to invest in some things that we know they're not all going to pan out, but we're actually buying into these technologies early on. We can do this through the SBIR program and STTR program. We can also do it through our base funding. We can actually invest in small businesses that will gladly take DoD money to develop out an idea. Some of them are going to work, some of them aren't. But the ones that work, we're going to now have a seat at the table, and we will retain government rights to their intellectual property at a very, very low cost. We want to leverage resources from the mainstream, but not necessarily their processes. That's actually what disruption is all about. We want to break away from the processes of the mainstream. And the last thing is we always want to look to new markets when placing a disruptive technology. You really don't want to adapt the old ones. They are too set in their ways that they're not even going to listen to you. Those are exactly the people who are going to pat you on the head and say, "That's a cute idea. Now go away." So you got to find that. This is what this is all about: finding the small niche market that will get just enough revenue to be able to get a toehold in the technology, and so that they can get on their own sustaining technology trajectory that is steeper up than the mainstream. So hopefully that's explanatory enough of what Christensen is talking about with disruptive innovation theory. And we're going to talk about this some more and give you some more examples to really make our point and see and maybe try our hand at this.